Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and a new Necromancer build video. This is the most requested build on the channel by a lot. It is a full Minion Necromancer build for the true endgame, one that uses the Golem and all the skeletons, and it works. It's strong, and in fact it can hit over the millions. This comes up after my Shadow Crit version of a Minion build, in which I was using, warriors and mages, but because there was no Golem, there was a pretty strong response that they want a full Golem build. So here we are with exactly that, but the problem is that when you do that, it leaves you with next to no options. Let me explain. For a full Minion Golem build then, of course you're running Raised Skeleton and Golem. That's going to take up 2 skill slots. And of course you're also going to be using Decrepify, because not only is that a 20% damage reduction and slow and potential to stun, but it also helps reset the cooldowns of everything, which is insane. You're also going to be using Corpse Tendrils for an AoE stun, for the fact that it'll also apply vulnerability, and with the insane aspect of Grasping Veins, you massively improve your critical strike damage. So it's not up for debate, you're having to run that too. Then you've also got your ultimate, Bone Storm, providing damage reduction to keep you alive and the massive crit chance, as well as the damage it deals itself, combined with the ultimate shadow aspect, turning it into shadow damage over time. Perfect synergy with, of course, your key passive, Shadowblight, a key source of your damage. Also, Bone Storm swirls around your Golem as well, so it's just really good. All of that leaves us with a single skill slot for any choice, any variance in the Minion build, which is kind of brutal. Now, when it comes to that last skill, I've tested a bunch of things, and I have found Sever to be a brilliant choice in the current version of the game. This comes after the buff of 1.0.3 to Sever, improving it as an ability. It synergizes with the unique boots Greaves of the Empty Tomb, which leaves a desecrated spot on the ground as you cast Sever, dealing shadow damage over time, with again great synergy with Shadowblight. Further, they have the most important stat you need in this build, which we have to stack as high as possible, Lucky Hit, which is really hard to get on boots normally, incredibly rare, so very good there too. Why is it you need Lucky Hit as a priority stat? Well, it comes down to the Minion unique, which is the Ring of Men Down. Tied to Lucky Hit, you have a chance to empower all your minions, causing the next attack from each to explode for a massive amount of damage, which you can enhance through crit and other buffs and so on. Basically, it's a Lucky Hit tied absolute burst of damage from your minions. And of course, as I've explained, Lucky Hit will also reduce the cooldowns of everything you've got going, with Bone Storm being your most powerful, insane ability. You want the cooldown of that down as much as possible, so Lucky Hit is super important. Outside of that, you know, your Golem is actually also a powerhouse specifically. It'll be another source of vulnerability with its slam, and the slam cooldown will be next to 0 thanks to your high Lucky Hit and Decrepify, so you're slamming constantly, applying vulnerability, hitting really hard, and also hard CCing everything, which is obviously awesome. With the Bone Storm also swirling around your Golem, that provides extra damage and the shadow damage over time for Shadowblight. So yeah, all of this just comes together to form a heavy-hitting, quite tanky Necromancer build, thanks to the benefits of Bone Storm, with some setup required and sort of consistent management of your minions. Which, hey, sounds like an actual Minion build. It requires a lot to get going, and in fact it requires a lot of Paragon points specifically, which we'll talk about, but this burst and this setup can crush enemies, and very well, popping whatever is alive with its Golem slams, the Sever spam, the Lucky Hit procs of the Ring of Men Down. So that's the concept, the reasoning, the explanation. Let's get into the details, starting with the skill tree. We're not using a basic, so put 2 points into anything to get us to your core skill, where we're of course picking up Sever at 5 out of 5 and even leveling it further from item contribution. You can enhance it to improve its damage, and with Supernatural Sever, it'll deal 2% times increased damage for each minion currently active when you cast it. So actually surprisingly good synergy with the minion build. We're also picking up Hued Flesh because corpses are a very important aspect of this build, and hey, because it's tied to Lucky Hit, we can generate a lot of them very quickly with all the Lucky Hit in this build. On the next section, we of course have 3 out of 3 Skeletal Warrior Mastery. It improves our warrior damage and life, so yeah, gotta get that. We also are gonna go 1 point Grim Harvest just so we can get to Fueled by Death. Consuming corpses gives you 9% times increased damage for 6 seconds. We consume corpses via 3 main methods in this build. Then we move down to the next section where we have Decrepify and its enhanced Decrepify and Abhorrent Decrepify for the cooldown reduction on Lucky Hit chance. As it's a curse, we're of course taking Amplify damage 3 out of 3 to improve our damage to cursed enemies. And of course for the damage reduction of Death's Embrace to close enemies and improving our damage against close enemies as another modifier. 3 out of 3 on Skeletal Mage Mastery as well, improving the life and damage of our mages. Then we come down to the next tree where we have 1 point point in corpse tendrils, and the rest is coming from item contribution. This has next to no cooldown, even at 1 point, because of Decrepify and Lucky Hit, but any extra levels are always appreciated, but we're only putting 1 point into that. We'll enhance it, and of course go for Plague corpse tendrils to make it a consistent way we can get vulnerability. Next we have our passives. 1 into Reaper's Pursuit. It gives us some movement speed on darkness skills, which is nice but not relevant. Then we go 3 out of 3 Gloom, increasing shadow damage from us and our minions by 6% times, which stacks up to 3 times. So stacking damage on darkness skills for us and minions, which is great. Then we have Terror. 3 out of 3 on this means darkness skills deal a 9% times bonus damage to enemies who are slowed, but then double that to those that are stunned or immobilized, which also applies to shadow damage dealt by our minions, which is amazing. Moving on, we have our ultimate tree where we get so many passives. Of course, Bone Storm and all of its enhancements, as you'd expect. We're enhancing our Golem with Golem Mastery 3 out of 3 for its life and damage. 3 out of 3 and Bonded in Essence is going to improve the healing we get from the Skeletal Priests, keeping our minions alive. Then Death's Defense also prevents them from ever being one-shot, really important in the true endgame. They'll never lose more than 30% of the max life at 3 out of 3, which is insane. 1 point in Inspiring Leader means when we've been healthy for 4 seconds, our minions gain attack speed. It's nice, I'd like 3 out of 3 on that, but it's nowhere near as important as the other stuff, and we can't afford it. We just take 1 point to get to Hellbent Commander, improving your minion damage by 10% times increased damage while close to them for each point you get. So it's actually 30% times 3 out of 3, and I've got 4 out of 3 thanks to my amulet for another 10%. For the last point though, we of course go Shadowblight for the key passive. Why not Kalen's Edict for the 30% attack speed for not taking damage for 2 seconds? Because the attack speed's really not that good, and then not taking damage for 2 seconds is really stupid. This needs a rework. It essentially is never up because you always take random chip damage. I don't get this key passive at all. With the skill tree explained, let's talk the actual summons. For the warriors, we're going Reapers with upgrade 2, so they have a chance to actually form corpses often. We're going to need a lot of corpses to keep our Bone Storm going, for corpse tendriling, for buffing with Skeletal Priests, or keeping a max cap of all of our skeletons. So that's certainly going to help with that. Then for the mages, we have, the upgraded 2 Shadow Mages now, giving them an additional bolt every 5th attack. If you were unaware, these were finally fixed in 1.0.4. They weren't applying extra shadow damage via the Shadowblight key passive. Now they are. Now they're hitting nice and hard, finally. For the Golems, we're going Iron, we're going upgrade 2. This is how we're making the Slam also apply vulnerable for 3 seconds, as I explained earlier. Now here we are at the big one. This is the Paragon board for our Minion and Golem Necromancer. We have a total of 5 boards in this build, and what I will say is that the Paragon for a Minion Necromancer, Golem Necromancer, you need so many of these legendary nodes. I've not actually seen a build demanding this many for Rogue and Necromancer as a whole. For now, let's begin on the Paragon board, where we begin at the bottom, come around to the right to pick up Prime, coming up to the left and up to the Glyph socket, where we have Control, the most important glyph for this build. You and your minions deal bonus damage to slowed enemies, double that to 20% times to stunned enemies. Decrepify maintains the slow benefit for you and your minions. Corpse Tendrils maintains the stun increased damage, and also your Golem is slamming for the stun, so again, control is very often at that 20% times bonus, so damage to crowd control enemies in this bonus of control is majorly increasing your damage. It's a consistent source, it's the first thing you're going to want, and thankfully in the starter board there's so much intelligence you can get to 40 out of 40 very easily. Either way, we're going to also make sure to pick up Preservation for the extra armor, come around to the left and pick up Knowledge, and then we'll leave the board on the left to come to our first board extension, which is the obvious and only choice for a minion build, Cult Leader. Cult Leader improves the damage of your minions by 15% times for each minion type you have active. So warriors, mages, and golem, majorly increasing your damage. This is the first thing you need in a minion build. So for the board, we're going to enter at the bottom and come around to the right, going through Custody Rare Node. Super important damage reduction for your minions. This majorly helps keep them alive. Further, you get benefits from the magic nodes around that, so you're going to want those. And then the Glyph, which we have Dead Razor. It's another one that's not really up for debate because it provides more damage reduction for your minions, as well as improving their damage, sure, but it keeps your minions alive, which is a priority. Its secondary effect also improves the damage that you deal and your minions deal. The more your minions attack an enemy, it stacks that up to 12% times 10 seconds. There are 2 glyphs that could go in this place that I want to talk about. First is Scourge, which is also going to improve your damage by 10% times instantly for you and your minions if they're affected by shadow damage over time. So instead of stacking up to 12%, which is not consistent, this is a consistent 10% times and therefore better. The only reason I'm not happy with this is because you get the damage reduction for your minions specifically with Dead Razor, which is why it wins. However, I would also recommend Darkness. This gives you 10% damage reduction to all enemies affected by shadow damage of any kind, be it you or your minion or Shadowblight. So if you're looking for extra defenses, I recommend Darkness. Anyway, we're going to need 40 intelligence to activate Dead Razor, so make sure you get that by picking up both the rare nodes on the board here for extra minion damage and damage reduction. We'll come around to the left to make our way up to Puppeteer for extra minion damage and the awesome magic nodes around it for that purpose. Coming up and to the left to make your way over to Cult Leader to get that going as soon as possible. While we're here, you can come up to the right and pick up Infused Caster to improve your skeletal mage damage, and they get some resistances which helps them stay alive ever so slightly. Back down to the glyph then, we're obviously coming around to the right to come up to the next board extension, which is Hulking Monstrosity to improve the power of your golem. 40% times increased max health and damage is ridiculous, and if you're running the golem, you must have this board and this legendary node. Anyway, we're going to enter the board here and come down and to the right to pick up Borrowed Strength, improving our damage while our golem is alive, and also armor. From there, we'll come around to the right and work our way up to the actual node to get Hulking Monstrosity going. From there, we can head right into the glyph itself, which is Territorial. It's really easy to get the 25 dex here thanks to the double magic nodes for that benefit and the 2 that you take on the way out, so it's really efficient to go for something that allows for dex, and Territorial gives you damage reduction up to 10% to close enemies and also another damage modifier in close enemies, so it's just so efficient for the points that we have here to get to the next board as soon as possible. Leaving that down to the bottom though, we will come to the right to pick up Frenzied Golem to improve golem damage and attack speed and eventually get that secondary effect going for the 360 willpower. I am 1 Paragon point away from that. We will come down to the left though to get to the next board, which is Flesh Eater. Despite the fact that we're not using Corpse Explosion, we are using Skeletal Summon, which works for this. And with our aspect I'll talk about later, for Bone Storm, we're actually consuming a lot of corpses to generate extra time for Bone Storm, which actually works with Flesh Eater. So as we consume 5 corpses, we get 40% times increased damage for 6 seconds, which is obviously huge. We'll enter the board from the top, coming around to the right to actually hit Stifle, giving us crit strike damage and damage to injured enemies with some nice magic nodes around it. On the way down, we'll veer left to actually pick up Flesh Eater. Then we'll come straight down to the left to grab the node for the glyph, where we have Exploit finally. As we are running vulnerable damage, you must run Exploit, improving vulnerable damage and scaling your damage as you deal damage to vulnerable enemies by 10% times, which is also great. Make sure you get the 25 dex to actually get this active, but I will say that you don't need to worry about Erudite or the points around it until much later when you have the extra points. What you care about is getting the glyph active, but you can also pick up Targeted, which is a nice rare node while you're here, but make sure you get the dexterity required and then move to the right to leave the board to our 5th and final board, which you probably guessed it is Sense of Death. Every Necromancer build seems to end on this board because it provides such a good legendary node. 15% damage reduction when there are 2 corpses nearby, keeping you alive because there's always corpses nearby. If for some reason there ever wasn't, it's a nice damage bonus, but you rarely ever see that. We will enter this board and head straight to the right to go get the glyph, where I have Amplify. Enemies affected by curse skills, which is Decrepify, take 10% times increased damage from you and your minions. Awesome. We get this active easy with the 40 intelligence that we're going to get by picking up both Deathmark and Preservation and the intelligence nodes around, heading down through the intelligence nodes to actually get down to Sense of Death to activate that. But we're min-maxing all of this as much as we can. I do want to come back to the starter board and level up Control more for more damage to crowd control enemies, but I want to do this for Dead Razor as well. I want to do this for Exploit as well, and that's what I'll be doing to spend the rest of my points leveling up my glyphs as much as possible. Now it's time for the gear section, where we're going to talk about exactly what you need after we go through the aspects. We are running 2 uniques in the build, as we've talked about, the Greaves of the Empty Tomb for Sever, and of course the required minion build unique, Ring of Mendeln. From there, let's start with our weapons, such as the Wand. You want a wand specifically because they have a unique passive of lucky hit chance. We'll also talk about that in a sec. Since we're using Shadowblight, we want the most efficient benefit to Shadowblight, which is the Blighted aspect, up to 120% times increased damage for 6 seconds, whenever the key passive of Shadowblight damages enemies 10 times, which is going to happen constantly in this build, so a major damage increase. For the offhand, we're going for a focus. This is a specific focus that I'll explain in a sec for Lucky Hit, but the aspect on it is the Osseous Gale. This is what's actually getting Bone Storm to last longer, up to 8 extra seconds, which is really important. Bone Storm is providing you a shield that keeps you alive and a major damage improvement for you and your golem. So you want it to last as long as possible. This consumes up to 8 corpses. So, as mentioned, it will trigger Flesh Eater and give you another way to consume corpses to keep this bonus going. Let's start with the head then on the armor. The aspect to improve your skeletal mages by 2 is there, and on the gloves we have the other one to improve skeletal warriors. For our chest piece, it's Disobedience, the best defensive aspect, generating lots of armor to keep us alive. On the legs, it's Shielding Storm. This is what's giving us a massive shield based on Bone Storm when it deals damage to enemies. And this also triggers and works with the Bone Storm going off around your golem, so brilliant synergy there. Again, it's the Greaves of the Empty Tomb on the boots, but for the amulet, we're going Grasping Veins to maximize the damage potential of Corpse Tendrils, giving us 30% crit strike chance when we use Corpse Tendrils, and those affected by it, we can deal 90% times bonus crit strike damage too, so it's how we scale our damage massively after the Tendril, which we're spamming all the time. For our rings, we have the Ring of Bendeln as explained, and then we have the Ring of Ultimate Shadow. This is turning our Bone Storm to shadow damage over time for both us and our golem's Bone Storm, generating Shadowblight, and that's really important. So those are the aspects. Now let's talk about the most important stats and affixes on your gear, which number 1 priority is Lucky Hit. This is to trigger the Ring of Mendeln as much as possible, as well as Decrepify to keep your Bone Storm and keep us going. You can get Lucky Hit in the build on your gloves, on your rings, and even your helm if you have a Sorcerer friend or a Sorcerer alt, because Sorcerer for some reason has a unique stat where they get Lucky Hit with a barrier active. You're also getting Lucky Hit from your unique boots, Lucky Hit chance with shadow damage, so amazing there. Wand is a main weapon for its Lucky Hit unique chance, and our offhand specifically is Quinn's Captivating Eye, which drops from a specific unique elite. To the southwest of the map, you can find the city Gyakul, and by heading out of that southeast to this exact point from the town, you will find a priestess, and you just talk to her, she turns into an elite, and she drops that focus guaranteed 100%. What you can do is then leave the game, reload in, she'll be there again, and you kill her until you get a good one. The problem is it's a unique focus, so it only has 3 affixes on it, but one of them is always Lucky Hit chance, which is what we want. You can re-roll it for very cheap, and I would recommend you re-roll the Lucky Hit to slow because we're getting slow from Decrepify anyway. Something like cooldown reduction is a good pick. The other thing you're going to want is Sever levels on your gloves, and on your amulet, you're going to want Hellbent Commander for as many levels as you can get. For damage benefits though, you're going to be looking for crit chance and crit damage as always, and then next to that, extra vulnerable damage as always. You can also get summoning skill damage, which is nice, but not like a majorly important thing. And I should also mention you want shadow damage and shadow damage over time if you can get it. But for the defensives, we're looking for things like max minion life to keep them alive as much as possible, and then standard stuff like damage reduction, armor, health, damage reduction from close and far enemies, and also in this build, damage reduction from those who are affected by shadow damage over time. Lastly, we have our gems, where we're using the max life increases in the armor. For the weapons, we're going for critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies, and for the rings or jewelry, you're going for the skulls for extra armor. Alright, with the build explained and reasoned, how do you actually play this? Well, it's the standard stuff of applying Decrepify to everything. Yeah, for the damage reduction that provides, the slow that also improves you and your minion damage to the enemies, but it's mainly about the Lucky Hit chance to reduce your active cooldowns. This is your priority with your essence, so make sure it's on everything before you even think about severing once. Next, you want to have your minions buffed up with the Skeletal Priest. It empowers your minions for 5 seconds, improving their damage by 20% and also healing them. So those are the 2 buffs that you maintain at all times. Then it's a question of the situation. Ultimately, in all scenarios, you're going to be corpse tendriling to pull the enemies together to generate vulnerability and massively improve your damage. Now they're stacked up, your golem can slam them all, which is great damage and further CC, and then you can sever spam the vulnerable, mega stunned, enemies to destroy them. To full commit to the fight, you would just Bone Storm before actually going all in with the Corpse Tendril Sever and Golem Slam. The idea is you're setting up the fight by pulling them together, slamming them with a Golem and your Sever spam, but I would say your Bone Storm is going to be up all the time because it's your main defensive cooldown and offensive ability. Because Decrepify is resetting Bone Storm all the time, you'll probably have these periods where maybe for 10 seconds or less, you don't have Bone Storm available, and in those times, you should know that you're going to be vulnerable and dealing a lot less damage. Otherwise, in every other fight, Bone Storm should be active all the time, and when it is, you're actually strong. But there you have it. That is our Golem full true minion build in the true endgame. I hope that I've been able to address this topic. It's the #1 most requested version of a minion build that people want. I've been trying to make this work as best I can with the new buffs in 1.0.3 and 0.0.4 for the Shadow Mages. It is in the best place it's ever been. Minion builds have a lot going for them when it comes to the Paragon, like so much more than every other build I've seen for even Rogue as well as Necromancer. And the glyphs are also insane. There's actually too many good options, as we talked about, that we can't socket them all. It's crazy that the Paragon board for minions is this good compared to how dry and weak it is in the skill tree. I've talked about this in my Necromancer Hopes for Season 1 video, where I would want to see a rework of minion benefits, where all this insane stuff that there's too much in the Paragon board, a bunch of it should be slotted into the skill tree, maybe as part of passives you're already taking. There remains a major downside of minion builds as well, in that if you ever die, you're going to have to summon all your skeletons again, which means generate corpses, while you're mega weak with just you and your golem. It sucks that you lose them all, and I think you shouldn't lose any, but at worst case, you should lose like half. You should never be left without all of them. It's just so damning. But yeah, without ranting about it too much, minion builds are viable. You can make them work, as you can see, but it requires a massive amount of commitment, and you need to be pretty high level to have enough Paragon points to reach the things that really make it pop. I want to see a reworking of Minion Necromancer to work a lot sooner in the earlier game. For now though, I hope this is what you were looking for. I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.